Hello, everyone, and welcome to Titans of Today, where our focus is on understanding the thinking processes of the world's most successful people to help anybody and everybody, people just like yourself, with applying these thinking processes to getting greater results in their life. Now, I have an amazing guest for our very first feature. His name is Alan Witters. He is the CEO of T4L, Hot Planet Repair Team. He's the founding team member and president. He's the project lead for Gravitas Carbotura. He's the CEO of Gravitas Infinitum and the managing director, CEO, CTO of Standard Harvest. And if that wasn't enough, I have two more here: the managing partner of 797 Capital and the managing partner of Falcon Group. So truly a tremendous technologist, leader, entrepreneur, and an awesome show we have here for you today. So enjoy.
Jacob, what we need to do is we need to pull the straws out of the ground and cover up the holes we've been digging to pull carbon out of the planet. We've taken 200 years to expose more carbon we probably actually will ever use again, and also more than we need and more than the planet can actually suffer because of the thermal runaway we basically have going right now. And I don't really want to take any guessing on this. I don't want to say, oh, we're going to start extinction, the second extinction round. Why even think about that? Why don't we just correct our ways early? So we focused on municipal solid waste because it's 90% carbon laying around on the ground that's already been pre-processed at some level and dug up out of the ground. Why don't we reuse it? And so we took 3 or 4 years to really figure out all the existing processes, nothing new technical, no dreams, no nirvanas on this stuff, but what existing processes? Now, I have to tell you that the whole industrial age has allowed us to develop thousands and thousands of processes, chemical and mechanical and all kinds of things. And if you just put them together on just the trash cycle, you can literally take all the trash and turn it around back into the input cycle. And that's how simple it actually is. But people always take it to a complexity that's a little bit crazy. The reason we haven't done this before is that we were in a linear extraction model and everything was free. All right. Oh, I'd get free timber when I cut a tree down. I get free air when I dig it out of the ground. I get free oil when I suck it out. All I got to do is buy the capital equipment to pull it out. And I'm like, okay, you guys spent 200 years pulling out all the carbon I need for the rest of my life. And we looked at reprocessing municipal solid waste, 100% of it. We looked at pulling carbon out of the air using photosynthesis. And we're even looking at handling sewage and being able to repurpose 100% of the sewage that's out there. And these are things that people just say, oh, I just want to throw them away and forget about. They're now getting to a point where we have problems that are astronomical. If you go to India, you go to some of the island countries, they have literally mountains of garbage. And I look at that as, hey, well, that looks like pre-processed materials that don't need to be pulled out of the ground anymore. And so we really focused on the technologies on processing. And we pulled together, because this is a paradigm shift and disintermediation of existing processes. We had to basically figure out how to make it zero risk and zero entry cost. And so we basically turned our MSW, we have a project called Carbotura Zero Fill. It gives you a virtual landfill. And that virtual landfill literally is a virtual landfill. Just give us the garbage. And we'll commit to reducing 2,000 tons a day, 1,000 tons a day. And at the end of the day, we'll actually pay you for it because we actually share our earnings back. And this is the way we need to think. We need to think about taking the money up front, take the money on the backside, and pay it back.
And you mentioned a few times in our first conversation about the inversion model of thinking and just inverting whatever the problem is and flipping it all the way around. So how did that play an effect in perhaps even developing the model that you just mentioned or the entire company?
You have to be the responsible party and sort of the adult in the room. And you can't demand instantaneous gratification. You have to look at these long tail model. They're forever businesses. A landfill's a forever business. Even though it might fill up in 30 to 50 years, how long are you going to have to monitor that afterwards?
Mm.
All right. Forever.
Almost perpetually, yes.
Yeah. And so people have always been what I would call industrial capitalists, have always been really focused on fast way to earnings, not fastest way to value. Okay. Earnings and value are completely different. And so we're here working on building businesses that literally can replace a landfill. And we're not trying to interfere with anybody's existing revenue streams. We're an alternative to a landfill. And so the big companies out there, like the Waste Managements and a few others, we don't want to interfere with their logistics or anything like that. We'll actually offer them free tipping in a virtual landfill. They don't have to pay anything. And so we don't want to interfere with any of that stuff. But we are going to change the world for the better.
And how did you and your team perhaps begin to even imagine that this sort of thing was possible, the carbon capture, and rather than a linear extraction, you were able to envision a process that was comprehensive?
So it's really simple at the first principle level. You think, okay, I need to capture carbon out of the atmosphere. I need to get rid of garbage. Now let's just start with plastic waste. And we said, okay, what are the processes all over the planet? We did a lot of research. We found the best one that has better than 2 times efficiency over other methods. And we said, okay, let's work with those guys. The last 3 years, we've been doing that and developing all the processes on that equipment that allow us to integrate into this new service model.
So you broke it down into what you needed, went out and what did you imagine what would make it possible? And then you identified each element.
Yeah, and by the way, there's no filters on the front end. It's not like this is the way we used to have always have done it. This is the only way the industry does it. There's none of those filters. All right. And so we said, how does anybody work with these kinds of materials? And we found a series of systems that have been breaking down materials. And typically they're very narrow band. They're like taking down plastics or they're taking down metals or they're taking down minerals. We found that this one system has been doing all 4 or 5 or 6 of those things. All they're doing is changing the recipe and the tuning. And we said, what if we stack a bunch of these things together and just look at MSW as a bunch of these materials? And we then started testing that. Guess what? You can put MSW in these systems. You can tune 8 different frequencies or 16 different frequencies. And we're using microwave accelerated pyrolysis. And all of a sudden, we're not necessarily processing one material, but we're processing all materials.
Hmm.
And it's in MSW, they're literally down at the first principle level. There's probably 20 or 30 materials, and that's it. Okay. We're breaking it down to that molecular level.
Mhm.
Now, MSW has combinations, millions of combinations of those 20 to 30 materials. But it's water, it's oils, it's metals, it's silicas and other mineral, and a lot of carbon.
And so after those are processed down, and what is MSW? Just so I can.
Municipal solid waste.
Okay, gotcha. So once you take the MSW, municipal solid waste, and you break it down to that level, are you commoditizing out each element or
What's really interesting about the technology is it basically disintegrates it or evaporates it into a vapor. And then what happens is this is a column similar to an oil refinery column, actually. And so the molecular weights self-sort themselves according to, okay, so I'm a light gas, I'm a heavy gas, I'm a light oil, I'm a heavy oil, I'm a carbon, I'm a metal. all those types of things start self-sorting, and we're able to actually, because there's so much energy going into those microwaves, it literally is finding the resonant frequency of the molecules, exploding those down to their molecular level, and then it allows you to actually get these process streams that are pre-treated, and we take those out. Now, there are secondary processes, like all the heavy stuff, which is metal, carbon, silica, we mechanically or some magnetic sorting or different other sorting methods after the process. But it's very efficient. It's about 2 times more efficient than any other processes out there. The oils are really interesting because what we do with those and the gases, we use it to power about half of the oils and the gas fuel elements we use to power the system. So it's self-powering. Now, people are going to go, doesn't that require an engine and combustion and stuff? Yes, it does, but we also run the flue gas back through a system similar to this, and it processes the flue gases into oxygen and more activated carbon.
Hmm.
And so it's completely zero emissions, zero combustion because there's no oxygen. Now, there's definitely enough heat there. We go up to 1500 degrees, but without oxygen, there's no combustion.
Wow.
And so it's literally just exploding. It's dematerializing the solid waste into its molecules, and then we basically are sorting them by weight in that same column.
So let's say you got a contract for every country in the world and you were able to develop and produce this all over the world. What would be that tangible real world impact that everyday people would see?
Listen, did you ever see the movie Back to the Future?
Oh, yes. Very long time ago.
You remember when he was putting the beer can and the banana peels into the back of his car?
Yes.
They're really, literally saying trash is energy and trash can be reused and repurposed into lots of things. And from our perspective, it's really focusing, and I haven't even talked about the secondary processes. We can turn this trash into not only activated carbon and fuels and other polymers and monomers and stuff, but we can turn it into graphite, which America has no graphite mining. 220 pounds of that are used in every electric vehicle. We can turn it into graphene, which is the strongest material ever discovered. And we also even go one step further into diamonds. We can actually do chemical vapor deposition diamonds. And don't tell any of the ladies this, but for about 3 megawatts of energy, we can make a 15 karat diamond.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's not necessarily a really practical use, but we can do it. More practical use is making industrial diamonds that can be put on drill bits and saw blades and stuff.
So then your vision with this over the next 10, 15 years, what you mentioned before about the time horizon that you're thinking out 5 to 15 plus years in the future, where do you see when you wake up in the morning, what is that result you're driving at that point? And what do actions look like?
Just how cloud services have taken over IT and computing, we see virtual landfill services displacing or replacing landfill type services. And the reason is it's just more practical. It makes money. It's not one of those forget it businesses that you have to monitor all that stuff. And you've heard the saying, one man's trash is another man's gold.
Yeah.
That's what we've done, basically.
The most powerful way to answer that question or to fulfill that statement.
Yeah, and this is actually proven alchemy, so we're really comfortable with it.
Phenomenal. How big is your team and what sort of people, great minds do you have with you?
My core team is about 8 people at the executive level, and then we have around 15 or 20 people that are supporting. And then we have about 50 to 60 people involved with vendors that are supporting our projects also. And we're now actually starting to create a teaming agreement, and that's really increased the team probably by another 20%, 30%. And they're focused on the relationships with the municipal solid waste, let's call them the conservators. The other is certifications. And another one is where we go in and open up an old landfill and we start mining it. We have another company that can actually open them up, bring us the materials, and remediate the old landfill. We hope to be building soccer field.
That would be a beautiful thing. What are the key drivers to scale of something like this? Because you mentioned that you have, I think it was 20 countries and you have 3 or way. Uh, but what are the key drivers to scale? And also, what do those negotiation or contract processes look like at that level?
Yeah. So the key drivers to scale are just finding people that will adopt this because this is brand new. And so we're looking at the early adopters. We're looking at the people that have the real problem and need to solve it right now and aren't protecting their career. They're actually trying to solve the problem. And so we're working with a whole bunch of these government entities and responsible parties from municipal solid waste. What we've done is we've structured it so that it looks like a capacity purchase agreement, actually a capacity lease. And what that lease does is it says you will take or pay our capacity to remove your garbage for 30 years. We want their landfills to last for 30 to 50 years or forever. And so it's very similar to a landfill. It's one of the things people go, I don't know if we can get a 30-year contract. I said, well, how long do you want your landfill to last?
Yeah.
And so it's pretty quick when you have that answer, that question asked. And we present them with a contract that says, you're going to guarantee the waste. And if you don't, you're going to pay this amount of money to us because we've invested this up front. And we're providing 100% of the investment. We're providing 100% of everything for this. We're just asking for a 30-year commitment on your garbage and a guarantee on the capacity usage. And that's pretty straightforward because we're not asking for money. And we're saying, we'll get rid of your garbage for free. We're not charging you a tipping fee. We're not charging for that. And here's where the real kicker is. We will give you 20% of our earnings back. We'll pay you for your garbage. And so this is a whole paradigm. We've seen these paradigms happen in personal computing. We've seen them happen in cloud computing, telephony, cell phones, where people come out with new business models. And that's really what this is. It's a brand new approach to business on municipal solid waste.
Mm. So do you believe that, let's say you're creating something innovative, does a new business model necessarily arise or some unique way to get it to market does that really accompany a great innovation that, let's say, these companies that like Amazon or Apple, they create not only amazing technology, but they find out a way to get it into people's hands, to scale it, to grow it beyond their own capacity?
I think it's not the technology. It's not a new innovation. What it is the business model is brand new.
Mm.
And that enables people to get into it quickly without a lot of risk and with no responsibility whatsoever. And all that Amazon did was buy existing computers and put them in a data center. And we've been doing that for 30 years, 40 years. And they basically put the capital at play to scale it up to a size where it made sense. We're doing the same thing. We're partnered with a group called National Standard Financial. They're a sovereign advisory fund. And we've got now about $3 billion of projects in the pipeline. Yeah. We have 100% of that financing lined up if the counterparty on the MSW is appropriate.
So you hear one thing you mentioned there essentially was thinking at scale or being able to execute at scale. So to go back, how does someone who's starting with a smaller company get the capacity to think and actualize at scale? Is that something that is a long-term process someone has to build up on, or can you actually start thinking at scale and start to adopt that into your processes at a small stage?
It really depends. We are very capital intensive because we have to buy a lot of equipment and put it together and manufacture it. Almost, I would say, most of our businesses are capital intensive businesses, but that's where we come from. And so when you know that you can buy a bunch of capital and slice and dice it down to the megabyte, the minute, the mile, the pound of garbage, that's what gets to be very easy to accept and understand. I could see us putting small systems around and where it serves a simple community of 20,000 people, right? And that's somewhere in town and literally sits in a 12,000 or 10,000 square foot building, maybe a 5,000 square foot building.
Mhm.
All the garbage shows up there and turns into materials off the back end. All right. LA has 300 landfills.
Jeez.
Those are basically toxic pits that are going to explode on people sooner or later.
It's a very pressing thing in that sense, because when you realized one of the most interesting sciences and technologies that I believe is coming out has to do with the world of material sciences, even down to, let's say, nanomaterials, as you mentioned, graphene, things like that. And hey, if you don't need to go reprocess, as you're saying, or to dig up, it's already there. Sparks my imagination is the fact that it's all already there and the potentials and the capacities that can come from that.
Yeah. Let me give you the long-term vision. 20 years from now, 15 years from now, you'll have one of these units in your kitchen.
Mm.
All right. And what'll happen is it'll come out with bricks of activated carbon and some containers full of oils and some other stuff, and somebody will pick them up every day
It's amazing.
and they'll pay you for it.
Or you can make your wife some diamonds.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So along this path, you've done many successful businesses to get here, and now you're doing this amazing thing. And what were some major turning points in your life towards success? The good turning points.
Oh, wow. Probably deciding to move out of my parents' house when I was 15. Neat. Because I became completely independent and I had to also become completely reliable on myself. And when you put yourself into that position, you start getting creative and you try to figure out how you're going to not only survive day to day, but month to month, year to year. And so I literally started training myself. I learned how to train myself things that were way beyond what the typical education systems would try to allow you to have. And I was probably an ADD child too, so that probably helped. I think ADD children are probably the smartest people out there. And I'd have a way of training that if I set a goal for something, typically when I was a kid, I hated things like English and math and history and all this stuff. I like stuff that I could create, art and photography, and I liked playing volleyball and auto shop because I was building things, metal shop, wood shop. And I figured out a methodology of learning and teaching myself where I set a goal to build something that probably I shouldn't have been building, like jet engines or rocket engines or whatever. And what it did is I had to research what I needed to know to actually do it. And so then I learned the math and the chemistry, the physics, the mechanical and engineering art, and all those things because I had to accomplish.
Mm.
That's where most ADD kids are. They're like, I don't want somebody telling me what my curriculum is. And so literally when I was in high school and junior high, I blew off all the teachers that said, here's what your study work is. I said, can I have independent studies?
Mm.
And that was how I survived through those years, is actually outperforming everybody from an intellectual perspective, including the teachers in most cases. They're pretty low level. And so I just kept going and I got into computers. And I'm a voracious reader and I'm a self-learner on everything. And so I've gone through physics and chemistry and microelectronics and electronics and microwaves and radar systems. It led me into actually doing design work, computer design, manufacturing, engineering work. I was doing that for the Fortune 250 in the government. And I did that for almost 10 years, probably. Became an expert, and we designed everything from vacuum cleaners to satellites to torpedoes and nuclear submarines and lots of different programs we were on.
Mm.
I was 22 years old and I got thrown into the B-1 bomber program to bring that back on track. And they had just bought $150 million of CAD CAM and CNC gear in 1981 at Rockwell. And the president of Rockwell said, you guys have done a really good job on some other stuff we did at Anaheim. And that was a bunch of anti-submarines, counter warfare stuff and some of the space shuttle stuff. And we want you to go back to Columbus, Ohio and get this program on track. And I'm 22 years old. All right. And so I'm thrown into this place. There's 2,500 people working there. It's a UAW union shop. And we brought it back on track in 9 months and got everybody trained on the computers and CNC equipment and got it up and running. And it's the boundaries that are set or pretty faked. You can usually knock them down pretty quickly with logic. You can knock them down with first principle thinking. And most of them are set up by people that want to control or micromanage what's going on. And when you work in the future, you literally can make the rules.
So you mentioned a lot of key points there. One of which I'll go in sequential order. You mentioned about teachers and the education system, that the teachers were oftentimes perhaps not the most amazing people to listen to. And one of the greatest principles that I've learned is the concept of who do you listen to? That you should listen to people who actually have what you want, who have been where you are, and they can help you chart a course to where you want to go. So for you, did you have, first off, what are your thoughts on the education system today and how it could be improved? And second, did you have people who you were looking up towards, or who were your models, or were you just in the learning so much that and you had a very powerful sense of belief? Or if you could break that down as well, what was it that allowed you to continuously know a little bit further, or see further into where you are today? And even in that place at 22.
I'll break that into about 10 different questions. The key thing is to project yourself out 5 years or 3 years or whatever, and look at intersecting vectors from different locations. For instance, I wrote a paper in 2003 that talked about car subscriptions and software controlled cars. All right. And I submitted that to Chrysler. They didn't want to talk about it because it had been a big retooling. But literally, it was the Tesla model that Elon Musk created. You've got 6 models. They have software configuration changes. It's all the same hardware. And people could subscribe to things like power windows or better stereos or air conditioning. And that's starting to happen now. I was only 20 some years early. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see those kinds of things happening where computing, auto, and software coming all together in the future, it's pretty easy to write that thesis. All right. At least for me, it was. And you can do that just about everywhere. And I've fortunately been about 85% accurate. Sometimes some event comes in and changes the whole scenario, but very rarely. People don't like change. And so it's very easy to take advantage of that when you're thinking in the future. It's like, we're not really going to change that much. This is it. The education system, if I could identify ADD type kids as early as 5 or 6 years old, I would get them through college by the time they're 10.
Mm.
But they'd be very specialized and they'd be designing rockets and crazy stuff. All right.
Right.
Now, the system can't have that because those are free thinkers. And the system basically brings you down to common denominator of dumbness. Colleges today are basically 4 years of additional daycare for the dumb kids that aren't smart enough to do what they need to do right now when they graduate or when they're even pre-graduation.
Mm.
There's some really smart kids out there, and there's a lot of kids that have been so programmed and they're programmatically dumb.
Wow.
All right. And that goes through adulthood, by the way.
Wow.
And there is the whole culture of good enough. All right. That's good enough.
Mm.
And you should really see that when people start hitting their late 40s, 50s, and 60s because they're comfortable and they're lazy and they don't want to drive and do something different or create change. They say, that's good enough. And so you have to really listen when you hear somebody say, oh, that's good enough. Is it really? Especially in business.
That's powerful stuff. So then if you ever do identify a scenario like that, when do you think it's maybe has to do with the amount of time or the duration that you're looking out of, but when is there a good enough in business, or is it a continuous? And obviously we don't want to stay within that mindset ever, because if you look at like Elon and rockets, it was this negative progress started to begin. But I'm really curious, like within the short term, let's say with your businesses, are you ever saying, okay, so this is where we're at here?
When I say it's good enough, it's when I'm getting ready to sell the business.
Ah,
And it's probably at a point where I'm either tired or bored of it, or that I think that somebody else can actually add more value or take it further than I can. And that's when I say, okay, it's good enough for what I've contributed to it. And then let's sell this or let's get it to the right owner to take it to the next level. And I've done that a couple of times. I've sold a couple of companies to employees because I felt I did a good enough job being the booster rocket to get it off the ground. And I really created the business for those employees. And literally, I put $1 million into one business, and by 2003, it was up and operating quite nicely. It was a hobby business of mine, and I'm like, okay, I've got it to a point where I feel it'll keep running. That business is still running today. I sold it to the employees for $50,000. Really? Put $1 million into it, but I sold it to them for 50,000. I kept some royalties. I knew what they could afford. I knew that they had a passion for it. They had their lives involved in it. And I'm not trying to make money on my employees. All right.
And then to zoom out, because I definitely knew what you meant when you said way of thinking good enough is a massive limiter in general. What is the difference between someone who says good enough at 40 and someone who keeps on going and just, is it what they're focusing on, what they want in life? What is the difference maker?
Well, I don't know. It's a tough question because
What is it for you?
I thrive on creating new things and thinking out in the future. There's other people that thrive on accounting stuff for the last 10 years. There are people that thrive on that kind of stuff. I'm the kind of person who likes to create and invent new things that help people and their lives. And so that's really my prime focus as probably a human being.
And when did you know that first?
Oh, early on, because I had the skill set of integration. Not very many people know how to go out and integrate. They only think about, oh, this is the way we've done it, or they look in their industry only,
Mhm.
the best technology in our industry. But when I start creating something, I look at everything. I look at medical, I look at utilities, I look at mechanical, I look at every type of discipline there is because I found out a friend of mine and I did an exercise. We reviewed patents from the early 1900s forward. And here was the challenge. What if you took those patents and applied them with modern materials and processes?
Mhm.
All right. That's an integration. It's an old design. And all of a sudden, we started finding these products that if we designed them today with modern materials and processes, were really cool. A lot of mechanical products like engines, all right, transmissions, really cool stuff that people had invented, electronic stuff, electrical stuff, inductive stuff. All of a sudden, you start applying modern materials and modern processes to those things, they become highly viable. And there's a lot of things we learn from history that way. But again, it's an integration. All right. It's integrating modern materials with older ideas. I don't like to take technical risks. If you want to get on a whiteboard, that's fun. All right. And let's invent something that doesn't exist. But there is more unobtainium out there in every startup. And you have to be really careful of the unobtainium that's out there. All right.
Tell me more about that.
Now, looking up on Wikipedia, unobtainium. All right. It's the dream of what you can't obtain when you need it. All right.
Hmm.
I got this great idea and I need this, but I don't know how to attain it. All right.
Hmm.
It's a rare earth mineral, rare space element, whatever you want to call it. All right. But it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
All right.
So you just you don't have that, or maybe you do have the unobtainium because you're not looking for it. Because I know you're extremely successful and have been with raising capital even from the beginning, which is something that requires, and you can fill that in better than I can. So I'm curious, how does one go from not having the unobtainium to having it?
Okay. So there's a really interesting balance. You have to prove that you have some of this unobtainium now and you repackage it into your product that's not attainable by anybody else out there, which means you have a market advantage. But there are so many products out there that literally, I could send you some links sometime, but it talks about nobody wants to buy your shitty idea. An idea is worth $1. An idea that actually is put on paper might be worth $100. An idea with a group of people that think it might be a good idea is maybe worth $1,000 or $10,000. And you keep on going up this graduated scale that a well-executed idea, it might be worth 10 million, but nobody gives a shit about your crazy idea at the beginning stage. So that whole startup curve is really brutal. And then you got to deal with bankers. Worse than that, VCs. Because they're not even bankers.
Yeah.
They're just really bad money manager.
So what was it like raising, I think you said 600 million?
I raised 860 million for one of my companies. We did that with angel investors up front. We raised about $1 million to $3 million first, and then we started raising strategic money. And we were raising it with our vendors because they wanted our business. And it was a logical say, hey, you guys had a lot of money. There were telecom companies and computing companies. And so we raised 60 million from one telecom company. They added on another 100 million to that. We raised another 120 million from another networking business and wanted our business. We raised 180 million from a computing company. I ended up buying some real estate for stock. I ended up buying a Cray supercomputer center for stock. I ran fleet of computers. We had 500,000 square feet. We needed more space. I didn't need 500,000 square feet, but they were good partner of ours. And I'm like, hey, I'll give you some stock for that whole facility. And then we raised a bunch more capital, and then I sold out. That was $2.5 million a week I raised.
Wow.
If you average it out over my tenure there, all right? And yeah, it was a lot of capital. We were one of the fastest growing companies on the planet at the time. We went from 0 to 700 people in about 3.5 years. We went from literally being in Minneapolis to being in 135 countries with operations and 65,000 corporate customers. And then we ended up winning the DoD, Department of Navy, NMCI deal with EDS. And that was a $6.9 billion project. And I got that closed, signed the contract, and within a year, I left the company. Decided it was time to sell my share. But that contract is still going today. The company is broken up into 5 different companies. And it was highly successful from that perspective. And that was a huge project.
So for you today, as the leader, as the founder of the business, what % of your day is dedicated to the right thinking processes and things like that versus the actual application to doing the how?
300% thinking, and I try to avoid the how. I try to build teams of people, 2 or 3 people that lead a business or lead a section of a business. And they only need to bring a problem to me if they can't figure it out. And I've learned that's very efficient. It empowers them. It gives them accountability and responsibility. If they can't figure a problem out, I welcome them to join to help figure it out. And it's, look at myself as a servant leader. I turn the org chart upside down, and I have to serve everybody that works for me. I'm successfully doing that across actively about 5 or 6 companies right now. And so it's worked out pretty well for the last 20 years. You have to be able to parallel things. All right. When you're in my position, I do very well on that. If I didn't parallel think, I'd probably die.
And parallel thinking, meaning dual channeling in essence. Is that correct?
Yeah. The ADD thing kicks in really heavy, and I don't have a problem having 30 or 40 threads open.
What is that internally like? What's that experience? How does that all come together from thought to, okay, here's lucky.
We're going 1 sentence communications. You're not going to get a big email from me. You're going to get, okay, What's your decision? What's the issues? And it's going to be very straightforward. My teams actually pull all the communications together, all the details and all that stuff. And it's about situational awareness as a commander on a battlefield almost. Where are all your troops? What are they doing? You don't need to order them around. You just need to know what.
And you mentioned as well, one thing I wanted to touch on, because for a lot of people that are working, maybe they're an executive, but they're still dealing with a lot of, and everyone does, I think, not everybody, but a lot of people that do have jobs are dealing with the politics. And for example, when you went into that organization that had 2,500 people and you were there tasked to figure it out, how do you deal with people who are micromanagers and get them to change their thinking so you can actually drive the right result for a business or a organization?
We don't know very quickly if they're going to change their way they work. Otherwise, you just go to micromanaging middle managers, you have to just eliminate.
Mm.
And it's pretty easy. It's been interesting to watch COVID and the virtualization of business because it's micromanagement hell. All right. Like you can't micromanage people when they're working remotely. All right. And it drives middle management. It's crazy. Now, what it does is it puts a little bit of a strain on upper management, and it actually makes upper management have to work. All right. You just can't order people around. You actually have to go into the business and understand what's going on in the business and what's happening, and not just look at a report and say, oh, that's good enough or that's not enough. All right. The glass palace mentality is getting destroyed. Orders from above and hierarchical leadership doesn't work very well. So I jumped in there. A couple of examples. We needed to communicate from our computer systems to the CNC equipment, and they wanted us to take our code or programs or files and give them to the old programming group that used JCL cards and paper tape. And they would hand code stuff and then give it out to the machine and want that paper tape to be read by the machine. And I'm like, these are DNC pieces of equipment, direct NC, which means an RS-232 or 432 cable would connect to it, and we would just talk to it from computer to computer. And with the program, not to go through all this bullshit. And so I literally paid one of the union workers that was doing all the telephony work in the plant. I gave him $1,000. I said, I need to have you run from the computer room, which is a mile away in this giant building, a single cable from here to this one machine. And he did it. And that Monday morning, he did it over the weekend. That Monday morning, we were sending our files directly to the machine, bypassing that department that had been there for 20 years. They were completely redundant. All right. And so that's something a union's office doesn't like to understand, or a union shop doesn't like to understand, but they're completely redundant. I have two more examples. One other example was we were machining these 2,000-pound billets of aluminum. They're about 6 or 8 inches thick, about 8 by 10 feet square, rectangular. And we would machine them down from about 2,000 pounds to about 60 pounds. And these are airframe parts for the B-1 bomber. And then they would take these parts and put them on a cart. And the parts would be wheeled all around on the cart over to the QA center, and where they would set them up and measure them. And they kept disqualifying our parts out of spec. And we looked at this and said, that machine that we just machined these on are plus or minus 5 thousandths. And you're saying we're out by 100,000 on machining? It's just crazy. All right. I said, and I looked at how they're falling over, and they're wobbling around and bending and shifting and getting dropped and all kinds of stuff. And I went and spent $10,000 on a Renishaw measuring probe for the machines, for our CNC equipment. Programmed the machine to measure the part on the machine. And we were within 5 thousandths over the whole distance of the part. And we submitted that as our QA. And so we eliminated the whole QA department. All right.
Jeez.
The next thing that happened, and this will just blow you away, is that at the time, parts would go into the part marking department, and they would metal stamp the parts like an old metal shop or wood shop. You had the letter stamps, and they would stamp the parts. We had a 40% rejection rate because the wrong numbers were being stamped. Damn. Humans. Okay. I requisitioned and I bought $250,000 of laser marking equipment and inkjet marking equipment. I put our parts on a conveyor line and the machines marked the parts. Guess what? We had no more rejection, and I fired 49 people that were marking parts. That was in a UAW shop, and I got 39 grievances in less than 9 months. Now, what was cool about it, and this is why the president of Rockwell hired me to do this, I'm an independent contractor. They can't do anything against me, all right? And so we were brought in to modernize that factory and change the way they did their business. And that's really tough. These are those things. And so my life has all been around those kinds of changes in large organizations and government organizations, things like that. I'm the guy that goes into the boardroom and tells you that you're going to be out of business in 3 years unless you invent your competitor.
All right. Which is true for a lot of businesses. Not everybody, but a lot of large businesses should think that way. They should think from okay, we're doing it this way and it's working, but for how long? They need to keep building that moat.
Yeah, you take the car rental industry and then you look at Lyft and Uber, and it's like, people, don't you understand that car ownership and car rentalship is changing to car usership? And that's why we created T4Ls. It's the high end of the car usership.
So where is T4L at? Where are you going? What's the user experience? Let's say I want to get into Tesla.
I'll put you in touch with some of my clients and you can interview them. But I had a client call me last Wednesday, one of our first clients. He says, Alan, I love this service so much, I want to sign up for 10 years.
Not effective.
Yeah, we just make it easy to have a car and make it painless. We're saving the typical amount of time we save our customers about 50 hours a year in managing their transportation. Going to the DMV, talking to the insurance agents, making sure all the maintenance is done, paying all the bills on the car. We have some users that have 800 bills a year because of the toll things they got to go through their traffic cycle. It's pretty crazy. T4L is an interesting business. It's 18 months old. We came out of the gate. We wrote the thesis, got the thesis pretty well proven through social media, had an 80% response rate.
Is that where you begin? I'm going to start.
We always validate. I can give you an example. The typical founders will go out and just say, oh, I got the great idea, and they just run right into the market. There's 4 stages of validation, and only one of them counts. The first stage is, yeah, I got a great idea. The second stage is me and Bill think we've got a great idea. The third stage is me, Bill, and this other guy on the street thinks we've got a great idea. The only way to validate it is, can you get the order? All right. So you really should go out there and pre-sell it. Pre-sell the concept and see what your responses are. And then if you got a business or not. So we did that. So then we did a leaf under offering and $7 million valuation as a seed offering. We did another crowdfunding with Start Engine, and we use crowdfunding to validate our models, both for investors, that people will invest and that people will buy the product. We got 200 or 300 basic orders out of the crowdfunding and 400 or 500 investors. The cool thing about it is the validations is what you get with that. And then we started selling. Actually, in May of last year, we started putting the first cars on the road, and basically August of last year, our first revenues were basically the third quarter of last year. And we've had 3x to 4x quarter revenue increase.
Wow.
Yeah, we're now at $42 million valuation. We're raising another $3 or $4 million. We're raising a bunch of debt for the cars. And we're going to take it probably to IPO in the next 18 months.
That's really amazing. It's actually really powerful, just that process and way of going about it, because You go from thesis to actually, like I said, social media validation down to ideally in order. But then from there, what I'm really getting at is it's entirely in the thinking. Right, you're taking the thesis. Okay, this is the thing. You're bringing it into the real world, and then from there, you're able to say, okay, this one's a go. Let's get the funding, and the people will basically come as a result. You're getting them in simultaneously, investors and the people, especially with the advent of crowdfunding. But that is very important. That it's primarily you basically just actualized T4L from the thinking to reality with none of the crap in between. Essentially, obviously, there's still challenges, but
Yeah, and so the other thing is that because this process is very thorough and very pragmatic, it preserves equity in the company for all the founders and the existing shareholders. All right. We've raised 3.5 million, maybe $4 million, and we sold off about 2% of it.
wow.
All right. And it's a whole other subject that I'd love to interview with you on, and that's how startup founders are selling their future out way too early to VCs.
Mhm.
It's the reason we don't work with VCs also.
Definitely, yeah. A whole nother topic there. Definitely an amazing interview, and I am extremely grateful we had this opportunity. Definitely will be more to come. How can people find you? What's the best way to get to support you and etc.?
Hunt me down on LinkedIn. You can easily search me, Alan Witters, on LinkedIn. And you can also reach me via email at alw@t4l.me. I have several email addresses, but that's the shortest one I can give everybody.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alan. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.